A former noble girl who now lives far away from the city is finding a way to buy back her grandmother's property by asking for money from her selfish father in the city. But surprise, surprise, the father is a douchebag and plans to sell her to wealthy old noblemen. Then, a problematic prince appears to save her, or is he? Let's find out. The story begins with a young woman named Erna reading a letter. Erna, who feels upset after reading the message. The letter talks about how she should be a good wife, but she's not happy about it. Sitting on her couch and looking out the window, Erna thinks about how another spring has come. She feels the world can be both harsh and lovely at the same time. Erna thinks about how the world doesn't care about someone's problems. She's sad about losing a family member and facing eviction from her home. Still, she finds beauty in the world, believing that spring will come as if nothing's wrong. Erna also remembers her late grandfather and wonders if he would think she's complaining too much. She remembers her grandfather's assurance that the world remains beautiful no matter what happens to people, yet she feels the bitterness of reality as she must safeguard the house and her grandmother. Suddenly, the maid's call for lunch interrupts Erna, prompting her to join for the meal. Erna composes herself, optimistic that things will turn out fine as she temporarily hides the letter. Later, over lunch with her grandmother, Erna confirms she hasn't met the lawyer but pledges to do so soon. Her grandmother, relieved yet concerned, expresses hope for a resolution to their troubles. Erna consoles her grandmother, believing in the existence of solutions and urging her not to fret. Unbeknownst to her grandmother, Erna has already consulted the lawyer and is withholding the truth. It's then that Erna receives distressing news from the lawyer about the dwindling status of their aristocratic family and the loss of their ancestral home, House Varden, just a month prior. Later, the lawyer informs Erna about inheritance laws and the passing of Baron Varden. Sadly, according to the law, only men can inherit property, and since there's no male heir, everything will go to Varden's nephew, Thomas Varden. Erna, shocked by this news, asks if there's any way they can stay in the house. The lawyer suggests asking Thomas Varden for mercy, leaving Erna feeling uneasy. Feeling stressed, Erna grips her umbrella tightly, feeling uncomfortable about the idea of begging for mercy. Despite her discomfort, she knows it's the only option to avoid losing the house and leaving her grandmother homeless. After meeting with the lawyer, Erna returned home to draft a letter requesting mercy from Mr. Thomas Varden. The following day, she received a response, which she remembered reading at the beginning of this tale. She wonders if Thomas Varden wants to punish them. At least, that's what she would do in his place. Returning to the present, Erna shares tea with her grandmother, noticing how the elderly woman has grown weaker in recent months. It's no surprise, considering the sudden loss of her husband and the impending threat of losing what little they have left to a distant relative. Erna worries about her grandmother's well-being, realizing the hardships she must be enduring. She knows she can never reveal the contents of that letter to her grandmother. Approaching her grandmother, Erna offers to take care of the dishes. She gently kisses her grandmother's head and informs her that Mrs. Guenin Grebe will be preparing some madeleines and tea for her. While washing the dishes, Erna realizes that soon Thomas Varden will inherit the house and likely sell it and the land without a second thought. This realization fills her with unease. She recalls the letter she received from Thomas, feeling disgusted by its contents. In the letter, he offers his condolences for her grandfather's passing, but refuses her request to delay selling the house until her grandmother passes away. However, Thomas proposes an alternative. If Erna agrees to marry him, he promises to treat her with special consideration. Erna couldn't shake off her annoyance from reading the letter, expressing it by slamming a plate on the table. Later, she sought solace at her grandfather's favorite spot outside, trying to hold back tears about her situation and Thomas's unwelcome advances. Aware of Thomas's reputation for mistreating his family in tough times, Erna finds it incredulous that he behaves as if he's her age, despite being nearly as old as her father. Suddenly struck by an idea and remembers her father's, Erna rushes off somewhere, driven by her newfound thought. Meanwhile, at a royal palace, a group of rowboats glided across a serene lake, their occupants chanting together. The noise disturbed a young, handsome man, Prince Bjorn of Lechen, who begrudgingly noted the arrival of spring as he glanced out the window at the rowers. The prince couldn't fathom why young aristocrats were so enthusiastic about squeezing into small boats alongside other men, despite appreciating their dedication. Later, he summoned a butler and complained about the noise outside. The butler apologized, explaining that the city had issued a permit, making it unavoidable. He also mentioned that more teams would join the event, making it even louder. Despite this, the prince remained unfazed, confident that his brother, Leonid Dniester, would emerge victorious. However, he pondered why everyone worked so hard to make his brother shine. Seeing the prince's discontent, the butler offered to move him to another bedroom, but the prince declined, opting for breakfast on the balcony instead. After breakfast, the butler informed Prince Bjorn of the arrival of the other crown prince. With a sigh, Bjorn acknowledged the news. Approaching him was Leonid Dniester, the crown prince of Lechen, dressed in rowing attire. Bjorn greeted Leonid, expressing his honor at meeting with royalty and noting his flattery that Leonid had hurried over before changing out of his rowing clothes. He asked what brought about the pleasure of their meeting. However, Leonid appeared angry and annoyed. Without a word, he tossed a magazine in front of Bjorn, revealing a cover story dubbing Bjorn as the Royal Poisonous Mushroom. This surprise caught Bjorn off guard. Leonid questioned if Bjorn hadn't heard about it, stating it was supposedly his new nickname. Bjorn's reaction to his new nickname was rather neutral, even showing gratitude for the magazine using a flattering picture of him. It seemed to highlight his narcissistic tendencies. Suddenly, Leonid informed him that Gladys was about to return to Lechen, a matter that made Bjorn visibly nervous. Leonid inquired about Bjorn's plans regarding this news. You see, Gladys Hartford, once the beloved princess of a kingdom, had tragically fallen from grace. Abandoned by Bjorn and suffering the loss of her child, she was now set to return to Lechen, according to a confidential source. The public is eager to see if the royal poisonous mushroom and his tragic former princess will reconcile. To some, it's just gossip for idle minds. However, Bjorn casually remarked to his little brother that the weather was delightful today. In fact, he'd say it was perfect weather for a poisonous mushroom to grow. This confused his little brother, who wondered what on earth he was talking about. Outside, we can see red poisonous mushrooms growing well, just as the prince had mentioned. Meanwhile, at the train station, Erna, our girl, waits for the next train. As she waits, she thinks about her grandmother, imagining that she must have found the letter by now. Erna feels bad for leaving her behind, leaving only a single letter behind to explain. She couldn't bring herself to tell her grandmother that she was going to see her father. She knows her grandmother would have preferred to struggle financially than seek help from her difficult son-in-law. Despite feeling sad about it, Erna is determined to solve the problem. She recalls her father, whom she hasn't seen since her mother's funeral 11 years ago. They're practically strangers now, and she worries he might refuse to see her. Yet, at this moment, Erna's father is her only hope. She braces herself for whatever outcome awaits. Erna wonders if she's capable of this. Suddenly, the conductor grows impatient, shouting at Erna to hurry onto the train. Startled, Erna rushes to board. This incident at the train station catalyzes Erna to embrace her destiny, regardless of the challenges ahead. She understands that the world doesn't concern itself with individual misfortunes, and she must take control of her fate. So, Erna resolves to confront her destiny on her terms. If her destiny involves clinging to even the smallest glimmer of hope, she vows to face it with all her might. Despite all her talk of courage, Erna finds herself worrying a lot once inside the train. Now, let's return to Prince Bjorn's palace, where he sits having tea with Miss Perez, a woman with whom he shares a relationship. Miss Perez appears annoyed, questioning if Bjorn is even listening to her, but he doesn't respond. Feeling a bit drowsy from arriving just before sunrise and not getting much sleep, Bjorn closes his eyes to rest. Growing more frustrated, Miss Perez presses Bjorn about an article she found in the newspaper, asking if it's true. Once again, Bjorn doesn't reply, simply closes his eyes. His girlfriend gets more annoyed and turns into an angry girl, but Bjorn is impressed by her determination, stating that it's not even noon yet, and yet she has already made the journey from the capital to Schuber, looking perfectly composed. Bjorn shifts his attention to the newspaper article. It mentions rumors of a brewing relationship between the couple, despite the husband's past misdeeds. While it wouldn't be wise for Princess Gladys to forgive her husband, who has done something terrible, she is supposedly tempted by his softer side. As a result, it's expected that this summer will be an eventful one for Lechen's high society. After reading the article, Bjorn nonchalantly drops the paper onto the table, seemingly unaffected by any potential issues it may raise. His girlfriend becomes upset once more, demanding an explanation from Bjorn. She suggests ending their relationship, unable to find a reason to continue. especially since she expects to be engaged before spring ends. Despite her frustration, Bjorn remains composed. He's not one to become fixated on a woman, calmly savoring his tea while Miss Perez is visibly annoyed that he doesn't seem to care. Bjorn sees Miss Perez as the perfect combination of elegance and straightforwardness, acknowledging that she's not a bad person. They both understood their relationship was casual, expecting to part ways eventually. But that was before she stormed in, upset over a mere tabloid article. Bjorn sighed and offered his congratulations to Miss Perez on her engagement. This declaration angered her, questioned on how he could say such words to her. Bjorn defended himself, noting that she was the one who initiated the breakup, and he merely accepted it. His response caught Ms. Perez off guard. Bjorn found the conversation tedious. Despite the girl's attempts to stop him and ask for more, Bjorn noticed her teetering on the brink of tears. He bowed sincerely, wishing her well and hoping she would become an outstanding countess someday. This leaves her speechless, realizing their relationship has truly ended. Bjorn exited the room, leaving her behind. Heading to his room, Bjorn was followed by the head maid, who informed him he needed to go to the train station immediately. Confused, he asked why, and she revealed that the queen would soon be arriving. Bjorn panicked slightly, realizing he had forgotten about his scheduled meeting with the queen. The head maid reminded him that the queen had been invited to the charity ball for the royal hospital that night, and it was his duty to escort her. With that, Bjorn hurried to prepare himself. Meanwhile, Erna remained on the crowded train, feeling like she might be squished to death given how packed it was. Judging from the congestion, she guessed they must be nearing Schuber. Peeking out of the window, Erna observed the bustling and confusing scenery, which started to overwhelm her. She tried to calm herself and blend in, feeling out of place as she wasn't accustomed to this environment, having been raised in another city. Determined to find her way around, Erna prepared herself as the train finally came to a stop, marking her arrival in the city of Schuber. Feeling nervous and anxious about meeting her father, Erna's emotions ran high. Upon arriving at the train station, Erna found herself bewildered by the immense crowd and was unsure of what was happening. She felt trapped and couldn't discern a way out, as she was being pushed further away from the entrance. Meanwhile, Bjorn and the royal guards were lined up for a red carpet. Observing the excitement of the people around her, Erna couldn't help but wonder who they were all eagerly waiting to meet. In her attempt to escape the crowd, Erna was inadvertently pushed right in front of the prince. Mesmerized by the prince's striking appearance, Erna couldn't take her eyes off him. The prince noticed her presence, but the royal guards quickly intervened, instructing Erna to step back and move aside. Despite the interruption, the prince couldn't help but notice Erna's distinct attire, consisting of multiple layers of lace. He found her outfit to be outdated and jokingly pondered if she had stepped out of another century. In the midst of the crowd, an elderly man expressed his irritation and jealousy, questioning why everyone was gathered around as if the prince was someone extraordinary. He complained that the prince was merely the prodigal son, the troublemaker of the royal family. Erna felt nervous, fearing the consequences if the prince overheard the old man's remarks. Much to her surprise, the prince did hear that, causing the old man to flinch. In such situations, it was always advisable not to make eye contact with someone who had annoyed someone of higher status. Instead of reacting with anger, the prince simply smiled at the old man, which caused him to blush like a little girl. Erna was impressed by the prince's dignified response, smiling despite the potentially disrespectful comments from the old man. She couldn't help but admire how poised and composed he appeared, finding the interaction rather remarkable. We can see the old man still blushing and probably becomes gay for the prince. As nightfall descended, Erna found herself still wandering the streets in search of her father's house. The confusing layout of the area only added to her worries, especially as the sun had already set, making it increasingly challenging to navigate. After some time of walking and searching, she came across a fountain where she decided to take a much-needed break. Sitting by the fountain, Erna pondered her next steps, realizing that her journey had begun on a difficult note. Her thoughts turned to her grandmother, and she remembered that the dress she wore had been lovingly crafted by her. It was Erna's favorite muslin dress. Despite her initial aim not being to make a favorable impression on her father, Erna understood the importance of comparing herself to a well-mannered lady in his presence. Recollections of her grandmother's teachings about poise, grace, and the conduct befitting a lady flooded her mind. With a determined expression on her face and a sense of pride in her practiced manners, Erna steeled herself to confront her father. Though her last name may be Hardy, she had not been raised by the elegant Duchess Varden. As Erna glanced around, she was captivated by the stunning streetlights illuminating Schuber city at night. The beauty of the city filled her with a sense of wonder. She realized that this was one of the charms Schuber city had to offer. Suddenly, she noticed that time was slipping away, prompting her to quicken her pace. Gathering her resolve, she pressed on until she finally reached her father's house. Meanwhile, at the banquet, Bjorn's sister, Haney, called out to him. She expressed her frustration, stating that although he was her brother, she couldn't comprehend him. Bjorn, as usual, remained silent. Haney continued, mentioning Gladys's impending return and questioning if Bjorn understood the significance. Without a response from him, she speculated that perhaps it meant an unlucky summer lay ahead. This infuriated his younger sister, who demanded to know what was wrong with him. She questioned how he could speak about Gladys in such a manner, considering how he had hurt and abandoned her. Bjorn simply listened to his sister's complaints. Memories of seeing Gladys in tears and hearing her cries echoed in Bjorn's mind. He remembered her asking how he could be so cruel, but he remained silent. His sister insisted that her concern wasn't merely because of her friendship with Gladys. She urged Bjorn to try to make amends. After enduring his sister's persistence, Bjorn's tone grew intimidating as he addressed her by her title, Duchess Haney. His words made her flinch in response. He informed her that the Duke was inquiring about his missing wife and instructed her to return to her husband. He pleaded for some respite, asking them to ease up on him and allow him some peace. Later, a couple of men called out to Bjorn, inviting him to join them for a drink. Observing that one of the men appeared downcast, Bjorn inquired about the cause of his distress. The other friend, named Peter, revealed that the source of his friend's sorrow stemmed from a failed investment. It seemed that he had put his money into foreign bonds that ultimately turned out to be a scam. Upon hearing this, Bjorn's interest was piqued, prompting Peter to express his appreciation for Bjorn's decision not to invest. This jogged Bjorn's memory of a time when Peter had attempted to persuade him to join the investment as well. If Bjorn hadn't been a prince, Peter would have likely punched him back then. However, it turned out that Bjorn's advice was correct all along. Peter mentioned that the steel company Bjorn recommended for investment had indeed yielded significant returns. Bjorn, modestly deflecting the credit, joked that it wasn't him, but rather Peter's exceptional bargaining skills that had led to success. He even humorously remarked that Peter's persuasive abilities were so impressive that he could convince Bjorn to change the color of his underwear. Peter reflected on his talent for making money, likening it to a superpower, and wondered if Bjorn ever grew weary of having the whole world within his reach. However, their conversation was interrupted by the man who had been scammed, pleading for them to stop and highlighting the insensitivity of their discussion. He emphasized the severity of his losses, noting that it wasn't just a few individuals who had been duped, and implored Bjorn to apprehend the scammers swiftly. Peter brought up the name Viscount Hardy, suggesting that he might be the father of the girl mentioned earlier, a Hardy who had lost a significant portion of his fortune and could be contemplating drastic measures. The prince noticed the name Hardy, but he couldn't recall the name yet. He also noticed the flower called the lilies of the valley, which he remembered were the same flowers in Gladys's bouquet. They had become popular for a while thanks to that. He only remembered Erna from the station, noting her distinctive outfit adorned with lilies of the valley on her hat. He acknowledged that she had made quite an impression, dressed in a myriad of old-fashioned trends. Returning to Erna, who had finally arrived at her father's magnificent mansion, she felt nervous, her heart racing as she hoped for a favorable outcome. Summoning her courage, she reached out and rang the doorbell, bracing herself for whatever lay ahead. Erna visited her father, Walter Hardy, and his new wife. I don't know what her name is, but we can just call her Scarlet because of her hair or something. Anyways, Scarlet asked what to do about Erna. Walter, still shocked by his daughter's sudden appearance, was speechless. The news came during a chaotic night, leaving Walter in disbelief. Walter, struggling with depression from a recent scam, was wary and hesitant, fearing Erna might be trying to deceive him again. Seeing his daughter after so long, Walter was surprised and emotional, remembering when Erna had asked him to protect the Varden house. Now, Scarlet asked Walter about their daughter's future. Walter brushed it off, saying he would handle it. Scarlet became angry at Erna's unexpected visit, thinking it was unreasonable. Scarlett added that they might soon face bankruptcy and suggested giving Erna a portion of their remaining assets along with her belongings. However, Walter dismissed Scarlett's concerns, stating he would promptly send Erna back to her mother's family. Having fallen victim to a scam, Walter already faced dire circumstances and couldn't understand why his daughter came to him after all these years just to ask for money. He found the Varden family's actions shameless. Walter walked in and saw his daughter, now grown and radiant. She carried herself with grace and wore a gentle smile, exuding a ladylike demeanor. Walter was amazed at her beauty, feeling proud of how she had grown. Meanwhile, Scarlett grew increasingly irritated at his sudden display of paternal affection. Walter couldn't help but admire his daughter's beauty and elegance. She had a slender figure and delicate features, reminiscent of her mother. He marveled at her natural charm, imagining how stunning she would look if dressed up. He even considered that she might rival Princess Gladys, the most beautiful princess in town, admired by all. Impressed by his daughter's appearance, Walter had an idea. He invited Erna for dinner, explaining that they needed to discuss the future of House Hardy. Scarlett couldn't shake off her suspicions about his sudden change in behavior. Meanwhile, Prince Bjorn returned home after the banquet, finding the head maid, Madame Fitz, awaiting his arrival. Bjorn greeted Madame Fitz with a cheerful "good morning," surprising her with his early return. As Bjorn headed towards his room, Madame Fitz informed him about an invitation from the palace, sparking his curiosity. Madame Fitz explained that it came with a royal order, mandating the prince's attendance at this year's Founding Day ceremony. Failure to comply would hold all staff at the Archduke residence accountable. The prince couldn't help but feel it sounded more like a threat than an invitation. Every May, Lechen hosts its Founding Day ceremony, starting with a royal ball. This event attracts attention from high society, with many aristocrats dedicating the entire year to its preparation. Bjorn realized he hadn't attended the ball since stepping down as crown prince. While there hadn't been much fuss about it before, he suspected the leniency wouldn't last. He was certain that the adults had already made up their minds during the charity ball. Bjorn recalled a time when his mother had asked him at the ball if there was a lady he favored. Though he believed he had firmly declined, he suspected his mother's concerns had intensified because of Lady Gladys. Bjorn knew he had been facing annoyances from all sides lately. The constant pressure and nagging from different quarters were taking a toll on him. Despite his efforts to stay composed, it was becoming increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, Erna faced her own troubles. She couldn't shake off the strange and unsettling atmosphere that had enveloped the house over the past 3 days. Her father, Walter, had been evasive, continually postponing his response to her request. At this point, she would have preferred a straightforward rejection just to end the prolonged uncertainty. The room felt tense and uneasy, heightening her anxiety. Suddenly, a knock on the door broke her reverie. A maid entered with an afternoon tea tray. Erna noticed that the household staff preferred a more casual tone and discouraged formal titles like ma'am. This observation added to the growing list of peculiarities in her father's new household. Erna nodded in agreement, appreciating Lisa's friendly manner. She was grateful for how well Lisa had been looking after her during the past 3 days, but she couldn't help feeling a bit out of place. It had been a long time since she had conversed with someone her age, and Lisa was the first friend she had made in years. As she sipped her tea, Erna found herself reminiscing about her hometown, Beaufort. The Varden residence was quite secluded, so encounters with people her age were rare. Her only friend there had been a boy named Pavel, and she often thought about the simple and genuine moments they had shared. Erna couldn't help but miss Pavel, her childhood friend who had left Beaufort to attend university. She remembered hearing about the Royal Art Academy in Schuber, where Pavel was studying. Erna asked Lisa if the Royal Art Academy was nearby, and Lisa told her it was about 5 stops away by stagecoach, asking if Erna planned to visit. Erna was merely curious about the Academy's location and didn't have any immediate plans to go. She found herself wondering how much Pavel might have changed over the years since they last saw each other. Shortly after, one of the maids summoned Erna, informing her that her father was seeking her. Walter welcomed his daughter warmly, remarking on her beauty. Erna couldn't help but feel uneasy at her father's words. Walter's sudden affection and concern felt forced to her, leaving her puzzled by his behavior. Walter continued, expressing his desire to reconnect with Erna after so long. He apologized for not reaching out sooner, admitting he struggled with his emotions towards her. Erna grew more suspicious, sensing her father might be trying to manipulate her by claiming he had been thinking about her for years and pondering what he could gain from his daughter. Erna was thrilled when Walter revealed his plan to gift her the country house. She thanked him sincerely, touched by his generosity. But then her father mentioned another request, asking Erna to stay with them. This request caught her off guard, leaving her shocked by the sudden change. Erna listened as her father explained that she could live in the house for just 1 year, emphasizing it wouldn't be a permanent arrangement. He expressed a strong desire for them to live together as a family, even if only briefly. Walter felt guilty for abandoning her and leaving her alone in a distant land for so many years. Now that she was of age, he wanted to make amends. The idea of spending a year in Schuber appealed to Erna. She saw it as a chance to experience high society, expand her social circle, and establish herself to some extent in their town. She appreciated her father's efforts to assist her in this regard. Scarlett, Walter's wife, also offered her help to Erna. She stressed that as a noblewoman, Erna could learn to refine herself and embrace the life of a glamorous young lady in high society with their guidance. Erna, however, was filled with hesitations and uncertainties. She thought about the implications of spending a year in Schuber with her father while leaving her grandmother alone with the maid back home. The idea of entering high society, a life she never expected, left her feeling unsure, pondering which path to choose. Amidst the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind, the what-ifs loomed large. She worried about the consequences of refusal and whether it might result in losing the Varden house, a place of deep sentimental value to her. Yet, as Erna looked at her father and Scarlett, she sensed genuine sincerity in their eyes. Their offer wasn't merely a formality. It was a heartfelt attempt to assist her, and that realization weighed heavily on her as she contemplated her next steps. With limited options before her, Erna recognized that spending a year in Schuber wasn't such a bad offer, especially when the prospect of losing the Varden house was at stake. Considering the circumstances, she ultimately decided to accept the offer, understanding that it might pose challenges, but was a path she couldn't afford to refuse. While at the bar, Bjorn and his friends discussed horses and upcoming races. They all agreed that the prince's horse would surely win, as they had never seen him lose in such competitions before. Some friends suggested Bjorn should sell the horse since they believed he wasn't particularly interested in horse racing. They thought horse enthusiasts would eagerly buy it. However, Bjorn firmly refused to part with his horse, despite not being passionate about races. One friend questioned why Bjorn would keep the horse if he didn't care about racing. Bjorn's response left his friends wondering if he was being childish, or if there was a hidden motive behind his decision. Additionally, Peter pointed out to Prince Bjorn that the Hardy family had hired a beautiful new maid. This caught Bjorn's attention, and he wondered how the Hardy family could afford new staff when they were supposedly facing financial difficulties. He suggested they might need to let go of one of their current maids to save money. Little did they know that the new maid-in that they were talking about was Erna herself, the daughter of the Hardy family. Peter was sure she worked in the house as a maid because he had seen her enter the residence himself. He had bumped into her on Tara Boulevard by chance and was struck by her beauty, sparking a brief conversation. Despite Peter's interest, their encounter was brief, as Erna got scared and fled before he could even ask for her name. He could tell she was from the countryside by her nervous demeanor. His friends speculated that even a shy country girl wouldn't be able to resist their prince's charm. As Bjorn returned home, he found himself trying to recall where he had heard the name Hardy before, as it seemed oddly familiar. Meanwhile, at the Hardy mansion, Scarlett was speaking with the famous Countess Victoria Mayer. Scarlett praised Erna as one of the most beautiful ladies she had ever seen, hoping that Countess Mayer would have the chance to witness Erna's beauty firsthand. Mayer hoped that Scarlett was truthful because otherwise it would have meant she came for nothing, and Mayer detested wasting her time. Victoria Mayer was a renowned countess, a legendary figure in Lechen's high society marriage market. Born as the daughter of a lesser baronet, she later rose to the position of countess and succeeded in marrying all her daughters into prestigious noble families. She became the reigning queen of high society, skillfully arranging excellent matches for every lady under her guidance. This made every mother with a daughter eager to seek her assistance. Scarlett had to call in all her acquaintances and use every favor to persuade Mayer to visit their household, yet Erna was nowhere to be found during this time. Scarlett grew nervous, longing to wed Erna to a wealthy man to resolve all their troubles. She remembered Walter's explanation about why they should keep Erna as a solution to their financial problems. Walter described how Erna, with her striking beauty, was a valuable asset, leaving Scarlett bewildered. He saw Erna as a premium product they could offer on the high society marriage market. Scarlett was stunned that Walter was willing to essentially sell their own daughter to improve their finances. He believed that by marrying her off to a wealthy man, they could pay off debts and regain financial stability. Initially hesitant, Scarlett eventually saw it as a practical plan, realizing there was no law against it. A maid informed them that Erna had returned home, sparking Meyer's interest in Erna's beauty. Erna greeted Meyer respectfully, reassuring her that Scarlett had been truthful. Meyer introduced herself to Erna and explained that she would be her chaperone from now on. Erna vividly remembers the day her grandmother found the letter. Her grandmother couldn't believe that Erna had lied to her, and Erna felt deeply sorry for her mistake. Disappointed, her grandmother urged Erna to immediately reject her father's offer. However, Erna couldn't comply because the house Hardy's lawyer was set to meet with Thomas Warden that day to finalize the house's purchase. It would temporarily belong to her father, with a promise to transfer it to Erna after a year. Erna tried to explain that her intention was to save the house, not sell it. She believed that living with her father for a year would ultimately secure their home, and she found this prospect exciting. Seeing through her deception, Erna's grandmother asked if that was truly what she desired. Erna couldn't hide her true feelings, and her somber expression betrayed her. Their conversation left Erna's grandmother feeling disappointed and disheartened. She asked Erna to give her some space, needing time to process her thoughts. Just then, Lisa, the maid, arrived with afternoon tea, hoping to offer some comfort and companionship. She invited Erna to join her for tea. Erna and Lisa savored cups of Earl Grey tea, enjoying the flavors. Later, Lisa found Erna intriguing and appreciated her kindness in inviting a maid like herself to share tea. She now understood why there was so much curiosity about Erna in the household. Others in the household often whispered about Erna, noting that she didn't quite fit the typical image of a noble lady. Some assumed she might be snobbish due to her background, while others thought her attire made her appear like a country girl. However, everyone acknowledged her undeniable beauty. Moreover, people couldn't help but notice her kindness, a rare trait among nobility, which set her apart from others in high society. Lisa, being an observant maid, also noticed the whispers surrounding Erna. Intrigued, she struck up a conversation with Erna about the artificial flower she was crafting. Erna admitted she had made it for herself and eagerly shared her recent work. Lisa was amazed by the incredible craftsmanship and detail, remarking that the artificial flower looked remarkably lifelike. Erna once again showed her kindness when she offered the flower to Lisa as a gift. Although initially hesitant, Lisa accepted the gesture, moved by Erna's generosity. This act only added to Erna's reputation for her caring nature among those who knew her well. Erna and Lisa had a nice chat about how pretty a flower would look on a hat or as a brooch. Erna was happy to see Lisa pleased with the idea. In return for the gift, Lisa decided to take Erna on a tour of their city, Schuber, as she knew Erna wasn't familiar with it and wanted to help her explore. Their first stop was Schuber Park, where they enjoyed the calm beauty of nature. Then they went to the lively port of Schuber, which had a charming maritime feel. They planned to visit the famous fountain next, but Erna had already been there before. Finally, they ended up at one of the well-known hotels in Schuber, where they unexpectedly saw Bjorn walking with another woman, Miss Perez, his recent ex-girlfriend. Erna remembered meeting Bjorn when she first arrived in Schuber, but Lisa quickly warned her not to pay attention to him. Lisa made it clear that Bjorn was strictly off-limits, and even looking at him was a bad idea. Erna was confused about whether the prince was a bad person, but Lisa explained that he was just different, leaving Erna even more puzzled. She asked for further clarification, and after thinking for a moment, Lisa remembered an article that had likened Bjorn to a poisonous mushroom, finding it an apt description. The next day, Lady Myers prepared a stunning dress for Erna, which made Scarlett anxious as she felt it was too revealing, especially with Erna's shoulders and breasts exposed. Scarlett politely questioned Lady Myers about the dress, suggesting that something more modest or typical of a debutante might be more appropriate. Lady Myers sarcastically agreed with Scarlett, remarking that Erna, at the age of 20, was making her debut. so seeing her in something different from the usual attire of younger girls would indeed be quite a spectacle. Scarlett was irritated by Lady Meyer's behavior, though she acknowledged her point that they were essentially trying to attract attention to Erna in order to marry her off to a wealthy suitor. Frustrated, Scarlett instructed one of their maids, Lisa, to ensure that Erna wore the provocative dress no matter what. She even threatened to fire Lisa if Erna didn't comply. Meanwhile, at Bjorn's palace, he admired himself in the mirror as he dressed in his red suit for the ball. He looked strikingly handsome with his black suit and elegant accessories. The head maid was pleased to see Bjorn dressed impeccably and ready for the ball, knowing that it would reflect well on the household and prevent any reprimand from the king. She informed him that the ball was about to commence and urged him to hurry so he wouldn't be late. But the prince wasn't concerned about arriving late. It didn't bother him much either way. Now, let's return to Erna's situation, where they were experiencing difficulties with the carriage. Inside the carriage, the husband and wife were in a heated argument about the carriage accident. Erna, feeling flustered about her revealing dress, covered herself with extra layers of clothing, desperately hoping they wouldn't make it to the ball on time. She couldn't bear the thought of facing the crowd in such an outfit. Despite her reluctance, Erna knew she had no choice but to comply, especially considering the consequences for her friend Lisa. She wished she could disappear, but they were already so late, and they eventually arrived at the ball. Stepping out of the carriage, Erna still felt ashamed and continued to cover herself. Lady Myers appeared, furious and incredulous at their tardiness. Erna explained the carriage problem that caused the delay, while Myers noticed Erna's trembling and the extra layers of clothing. Scarlett clarified that Erna insisted on attending the ball only with those extra layers, and they reluctantly agreed. Myers, having little patience for chit-chat, hurried Erna inside the ballroom, telling her that all the debutantes for the year had already been introduced, and the king had arrived, leaving them with little time. Once inside, the announcer declared the arrival of the Hardy family. Myers swiftly removed Erna's extra layers of clothing, revealing a stunning yet revealing dress that astonished everyone in the ballroom. It seemed as though Erna had become the most beautiful and important guest at the ball. At the ball, Erna's stunning beauty captivated everyone, particularly when they discovered her connection to the Hardy family and her identity as Walter's daughter. Many were surprised as they hadn't known Walter had such a lovely daughter, and rumors circulated about her living in the countryside and being unwell, leading them to assume her tardiness was due to her past illness. Amidst the attention, Erna struggled with social anxiety, finding it hard to breathe. She suddenly realized her shawl was missing but remained unaware that Lady Victory had taken it. The moment she noticed its absence, embarrassment flooded over her. Standing exposed, her anxiety intensified, making it hard to catch her breath. As all eyes in the room focused on Erna, wondering why she remained motionless, her anxiety surged. The intense scrutiny from the guests only heightened her unease, and the whispered conversations around her added to her discomfort. Suddenly, the tension was broken by the announcer's proclamation of the arrival of the Archduke of Schuber, Prince Bjorn. Prince Bjorn made a grand entrance, his black suit and exquisite golden accessories enhancing his already remarkable appearance. His beauty and charm were undeniable as he moved through the crowd. Unexpectedly, Prince Bjorn came face to face with Erna, who stood frozen in place. Skylar felt a pang of nervousness, unsure of how to navigate this unexpected encounter as the prince blocked their path. Meanwhile, Lady Victoria Myers couldn't help but be impressed by Erna's courage in the face of such a daunting situation. Prince Bjorn was also taken aback, puzzled by the sight of the girl standing frozen before him. He couldn't comprehend why she had become the center of attention, especially noting her trembling and unsteady demeanor. Acting quickly, Prince Bjorn moved to catch her, preventing any potential embarrassment. Erna, overwhelmed by her anxiety, couldn't hold back her tears. Prince Bjorn gently held her against his chest, offering comfort in the midst of the commotion. Meanwhile, the murmurs of the crowd persisted, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. With swift grace, the prince guided Erna to regain her composure. He encouraged her to take slow, deep breaths, his soothing presence helping to ease her distress. Erna found herself drawn to his captivating gaze as she struggled with her emotions. Despite her trembling anxiety, Erna's natural beauty shone through, her baby blue eyes and flawless features. The prince continued to reassure Erna, guiding her to remain calm and take slow, soothing breaths to ease her anxiety. Gradually, Erna started to feel more comfortable. But when she looked into the prince's eyes, she suddenly realized she was talking to the prince himself. Surprised, she moved away from Bjorn and quickly said sorry for her earlier rudeness. Prince Bjorn, seeing that Erna was shocked, understood her situation. He also noticed that although she seemed uncomfortable in a big crowd, she had chosen to wear a revealing dress to the ball. Then Lady Myers came up to the prince, apologizing sincerely with a graceful smile. She told him that Erna Hardy was nervous, which caused her earlier mistake. But Prince Bjorn, who was usually quiet and to the point, started to figure things out. He realized Lady Myers had something to do with it all. Erna then understood she had been set up by the most famous matchmaker in Lechen, Lady Myers herself. After this, people at the ball couldn't stop talking about Erna and Lady Myers. They were amazed at how Lady Myers used the Archduke to showcase Erna from Mid-Hardy. It made them wonder if this was Lady Myers' plan all along. But they still had questions about how she knew the prince would arrive late and how else to explain what happened. The surprise left everyone stunned, realizing that Miss Erna wasn't the simple country girl they thought she was. Her actions showed unexpected cleverness. Erna took a break on the couch, hearing Lady Myers approaching. Lady Myers asked how Erna was feeling and invited her to dance at the ball, her debutante ball. Erna, clearly angry, firmly refused, visibly irritated. Lady Myers smiled at Erna's spirited response, impressed. She gently lifted Erna's chin and explained that she respected her choice not to dance. But she advised Erna to carry herself with dignity for the rest of the evening. Lady Myers understood that Erna had been brought up as a Varden and trusted her to uphold the family's good name. Erna thought about Lady Myers' words and was glad to know she held the House of Varden in high esteem. So she agreed to stay a bit longer, even though she wanted to leave. She recognized her duty as the Lady of House Varden. While taking a break, Erna spotted the famous twin princes, Prince Bjorn and Prince Leonid. Despite their nearly identical appearance, she knew they emitted different vibes. Crowned Prince Leonid seemed rigid and precise, while Prince Bjorn seemed relaxed, as if he were just casually wandering around the party. Erna remembered encountering Prince Bjorn at the train station and in front of the hotel, affectionately calling him the poison mushroom. When Prince Bjorn caught Erna's eye, she felt uneasy realizing he had noticed her. The twins noticed Erna's nervousness. Leonid asked about her, wondering if she was the one causing a stir. He also questioned if there was any connection between them. Bjorn reassured his brother that he could make things happen if he wanted to, making Leonid visibly uncomfortable. In his laid-back style, Bjorn suggested his brother ask Erna for a dance, thinking she wouldn't refuse the crown prince. Curious, Leonid asked why he should do that. Bjorn pointed out that his brother seemed interested in Erna, but Leonid quickly dismissed the idea, saying it was nonsense. He clarified that he was only concerned about the woman he liked getting involved with his older brother. Despite denying any romantic interest in Erna, Leonid kept asking about her, just in case. Bjorn observed Erna, thinking about the situation. If he hadn't heard about the Hardy family and Lady Myers' matchmaking, he might have been fooled. He was curious to see if Erna could handle herself, despite her obvious nervousness. Bjorn thought Erna had already grabbed everyone's attention with her bold outfit. Now he believed it was time for her to play the delicate lady role. He wasn't sure who might fall for this act, but he wasn't worried about any potential challenges they might face. Meanwhile, in another setting, Bjorn's father, King Philip, contemplated marrying off his son, Bjorn. The king and queen sat in their garden, enjoying tea and discussing their son. King Philip expressed his growing belief that marrying Bjorn was the right move. The queen was skeptical, doubting whether Bjorn would willingly agree to marriage. She asked if there was any woman he was interested in, and Bjorn cryptically mentioned something about one divorce being enough. The queen felt uneasy hearing her son's response, and the king, who overheard, remained silent. The king, with a frown, acknowledged that he understood the challenges Bjorn faced and the tough decisions he had to make. He couldn't shake off the memory of Bjorn's words about stepping down as crown prince and divorcing. He remembered the sadness in his son's eyes and how determined he was not to change his mind equals. Feeling heavy-hearted, the king thought deeply about the situation. After much consideration, he couldn't find a better solution. Turning to his wife, he asked if she thought it would be acceptable if Bjorn chose his own marriage, rather than it being arranged by them. The queen replied that the problem was Bjorn wouldn't desire another marriage. In response, the king said they needed to make Bjorn want it. He then asked if the queen was sure there was nothing between Bjorn and the young lady, Erna, from earlier. The queen knew that their son, Leonid, had mentioned not sensing any connection. She realized the king might be open to approving of the hardy girl. The king clarified that it wasn't exactly approval, but if Miss Erna could win Bjorn's affection, he would accept her, provided she proved to be better than Gladys. The queen reassured her husband, telling him not to worry. She knew their son well and was certain he would never reconcile with Gladys. Meanwhile, after the party ended, Bjorn was back at his residence when a person with beautiful blonde hair and dressed in blue arrived unexpectedly. Bjorn was surprised by this visitor, while the head maid nervously apologized, explaining they couldn't stop her from coming. However, Bjorn already understood the situation. He then instructed the maids to bring him a strong drink. Bjorn entered the sitting room and found his ex-wife, Gladys, there. Gladys, with her lovely golden hair and the same baby blue eyes as Erna's, called out to him with a sad expression. He steps into the room and decides to join her for tea, sitting down to meet his ex-wife for the first time in a while. Gladys asks Bjorn how he's been, noting it's been quite some time, but Bjorn, as usual, remains silent. She trembles with sadness and apologizes to Bjorn for showing up unexpectedly. She thought it might be better for them to meet openly, but Bjorn continues to listen without saying a word. As tears start to stream down her face, Gladys can't help but cry, her tears pooling in her hands. Still, Bjorn remains indifferent, showing no reaction. In her emotional state, Gladys continues to apologize for all the trouble she caused. Bjorn finally responds, acknowledging that the loose ends of their relationship have been tied up. He notes that she got what she needed from him, and he got what he needed from her. With a smile, he asks if that's the case, and he's about to take a sip of his tea. He adds that it's nice to see she hasn't changed a bit, and he can always count on her to bore him with the same old antics. Bjorn wondered what Gladys truly wanted, suspecting she didn't come all the way to Lechen just to say sorry. He speculated if it was a directive from the King of Lars. Continuing, Bjorn suggested maybe he sent her to Lechen to reconcile with her ex-husband, now that their problems were sorted out. Bjorn remarked on Gladys' obedience to her father, noting she hadn't changed. Listening, Gladys felt tense, clutching her clothes. She explained she didn't just come to apologize. She gathered the courage because she has been carrying a sense of sorrow all this time. Interrupting, Bjorn told her she must have misunderstood something, emphasizing that their deal was fair and actually favored their side more. Gladys is offended by his words, to the point where Bjorn just laughs at her. He sarcastically comments on her apparent concern for him, joking that he's almost touched and might cry. Bjorn's expression suddenly changes as he forcefully pushes the teacup onto the table, causing it to shatter right in front of her. One of the maids hears the noise and rushes to the room, concerned about what happened. Bjorn quickly orders the maid to clean up the mess. As he leaves the room, we see Gladys crying over the broken teacup, deeply affected by the tense encounter. 3 days after the ball, we find ourselves at Erna's place. Lisa asks Erna how she's feeling, and she responds that she's all right and feeling better. Lisa sighs, expressing her concern for Erna. She mentions that Erna had been stuck in bed for 3 days straight after the ball. She reflects on how Erna shouldn't be paying attention to that awful prince, but no matter how many times she tells her, Erna won't listen. Then, Lisa tells Erna to wait for a moment and returns with a bunch of tabloids, placing them in front of her, which surprises Erna. Erna asks what all these tabloids are for, and Lisa responds that it's her gift to Erna piles of newspapers and tabloids. Lisa tells Erna that by reading all of this, she can learn all about high society. Erna, a bit skeptical, asks if she can really study up on high society just by reading tabloids and newspapers. Lisa affirms that it's true, explaining that there's no better way to learn about society's elite than by reading various news in the tabloids and newspapers. While Erna reads through the materials, she notices that one of the newspapers has been cut or is missing an article. Lisa is surprised by this discovery and realizes that it's something the other maids have done, cutting out the section featuring the handsome prince. Lisa suggests that Erna should start her study while she takes care of organizing the mountain of letters and bouquets that have arrived for her while she's been in bed. As Erna reads through the newspapers, she comes across an article about Prince Bjorn's divorce from Princess Gladys. The article mentions that the crown prince hasn't visited his child since the divorce, and sadly, their child passed away due to illness without ever seeing his father. It further notes that Prince Bjorn didn't attend his son's funeral and is known for his cold demeanor, even among his closest acquaintances. Following the scandal, Prince Bjorn relinquishes his title as crown prince to Prince Leonid. However, in reality, he was dethroned, and this incident solidifies his reputation as the royal poisonous mushroom. After reading the article, Erna becomes furious, expressing her anger at Bjorn for being such an awful father. Meanwhile, Bjorn and his friends are having a drink. One of his friends raises a toast, suggesting that at this moment, Count Lehman appears to be the most likely candidate to become the future husband of the hardy girl. Bjorn hears this, but doesn't seem to care much as they continue playing cards. Another friend asks about Count Lehman and is surprised that the old man is still alive. They also discuss how Viscount Hardy has been meeting with Count Lehman frequently. This annoys Bjorn, reflecting on how it seems like no matter where he goes, the name Hardy is always in the air. He's grown tired of hearing that name. As they talk about Erna, they express that no one really cares who she marries as long as the man is willing to pay a high enough price. They mention that this is the norm with these sorts of arranged marriages. They even jest that if the count dies quickly enough, they might be able to sell the girl a second time, making it quite an attractive offer for them. Thinking back on it, they talk about how it's sad that Miss Hardy is going to marry an older man without ever having the chance to date a nice, unmarried guy. One friend notices that Erna bears a strange resemblance to Princess Gladys, even though their features are different, but they both emit a similar vibe. The others agree, but the prince stays quiet, secretly thinking his friends are being foolish. They see it as reasonable that Erna and Princess Gladys possess a similar delicate yet captivating beauty. The prince privately reflects on two of his friends, believing they won't understand the consequences of their actions until they experience them firsthand. One friend suggests doing something nice for Erna, proposing they introduce her to the pleasure of being courted by a decent young man before she ties the knot. They think it could create a lovely memory for everyone, and they even want to bet on who can charm Miss Hardy. They see it as a way to show kindness to the unfortunate girl. This idea angers the prince and me too. Erna finds herself captivated by a lily-of-the-valley flower, marveling at its beauty. This particular blossom holds a special place in her heart as her favorite. Once, she painstakingly crafted these by hand, and now that she has so many of them, she ponders what to do with them. Back when she resided at House Varden, she used to sell these creations and wonders if she could do the same here. Perhaps it could aid in saving the house. She mulls over how to find a way to make it happen. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door, and Lisa asks if she can enter, to which Erna agrees. Lisa steps in, bearing a large gift, a new dress for Erna. Anxiously, Erna inquires why she's being gifted a new dress. Lisa responds by questioning if Erna wasn't informed, mentioning that she and Lady Myers are attending the opening of the art exhibition today. Erna is taken aback by her lack of knowledge about it. Lisa elaborates that it's a prestigious exhibition held by the Royal Art Academy annually and asks about the new dress, emphasizing its modesty. Erna reflects on the Royal Art Academy and realizes it's where her childhood friend, Pavel, resides. She hopes for a chance encounter with him there. Upon arriving at the Royal Art Academy, Erna finds herself amidst a throng of people. Surprisingly, she doesn't feel as intimidated as before, perhaps due to the prospect of seeing Pavel. Lady Myers expresses her wish to Erna that she performs well today, assuming she lacks any moral defect that might lead her to relish public embarrassment. Erna assures her that she will do her utmost. Later, an incident occurs that displeases Lady Myers, causing Erna to tremble with fear. Lady Myers tells her she's beyond redemption, to which Erna responds with an apology. Beside Lady Myers, there's a persistent reprimand directed at Erna, emphasizing that the issue not only affects her, but also impacts Lady Myers' reputation. Despite this, Erna remains contrite. Lady Myers asks Erna how she plans to stop being pathetic, to which Erna replies that she's not deliberately behaving that way. Lady Myers instructs her to compose herself quickly so they can return indoors. Erna had hoped to endure the day, but when she found herself amidst the gazes of numerous onlookers, she felt suffocated once more. Earlier, she had been reluctant to return inside, but she acknowledges she shouldn't let such things shake her. Later, she spots a man with fiery red hair and attire, possessing a sturdy build. She wonders if it might be her childhood friend, Pavel. Erna calls out to him, but it seems he doesn't hear her. Determined, she decides to pursue him to catch his attention. Outside, Prince Bjorn can be seen resting on a bench. Prince Bjorn hears a voice calling out and observes Erna running. Upon closer inspection, he recognizes her as Erna Hardy. Exhausted after losing sight of him and failing to confirm if it was indeed her childhood friend, Erna sits down, feeling despondent after making the journey solely in hopes of seeing him again. Unaware of Prince Bjorn's presence right in front of her, Erna blushes when she finally realizes it's truly him. Erna swiftly retreats to avoid being spotted by the prince. From a distance, the prince observes her, catching snippets of her mentioning the name Pavel and speculating if she's planning a clandestine meeting in the garden. He finds the idea intriguing, contemplating whether it's a covert rendezvous in some secluded corner, finding it rather impressive. He notices her dropped handkerchief and smiles, impressed by the old-fashioned tactic. Later, Erna finds herself at the art exhibit, standing motionless and berating herself for once again appearing foolish in front of the prince. Suddenly, murmurs spread through the crowd about a certain individual, and there she stands, a breathtaking lady who rivals the beauty of Princess Gladys. Clad in a magnificent dark blue and golden gown that enhances her allure, she exudes grace and sophistication. This captivates Erna, who is spellbound by the lady's sheer beauty. Erna reflects on Princess Gladys, admiring her elegance and grace in person compared to the images she had seen in media. She wonders if Princess Gladys holds resentment toward her ex-husband for his past actions. Erna imagines a scenario where, had it not been for those tragic events, Gladys could have been a remarkable queen, akin to the current one. These thoughts leave Erna perplexed, struggling to comprehend why Prince Bjorn would harm such a beautiful woman and strip her of her crown princess title due to his infidelity. Suddenly, Prince Bjorn appears at the art exhibit, causing whispers to spread among the attendees. Princess Gladys notices him, but Bjorn's reaction is cold and somewhat irritated upon seeing her. Prince Bjorn reminisces about his earlier conversation with Gladys at the mansion, where he believed she had come to terms with their situation. However, he realizes he may have underestimated her resolve. It dawns on him that Gladys genuinely intends to reclaim her position. With a sly grin, Prince Bjorn finds the notion of Gladys's request absurd. He's unwilling to take any action that would result in a loss for himself, especially when it involves Gladys. Reflecting on recent conversations with his friends, Prince Bjorn recalls discussions revolving around a bet concerning Erna. One friend proposed that the bet commence on the opening day of the Royal Art Exhibition, an event they all planned to attend. They deemed it a fair starting point, with the bet concluding on the day of the rowing competition coinciding with the summer festival, the pinnacle event for Lechen's elite. Further deliberations on the bet led to the agreement that the victor would be the one watching fireworks with Lady Erna from a boat on the Arbit River. They envisioned the excitement of the competition, not dwelling on the weight of the stakes but relishing in the thrill. The reward for the winner would be a townhouse in the city's heart. Turning to Bjorn, they asked if he'd like to join. Initially silent, Bjorn's eventual agreement intrigued by the prospect of this betting game, momentarily quelling his friend's disappointment, expecting the king of bets to participate. Bjorn is roused from his thoughts by Erna's call, and he greets her warmly. Curious, Erna asks about the commotion. Amid their conversation, onlookers whisper, observing their interaction. Bjorn informs Erna that she left her handkerchief on a nearby bench. Their eyes meet, and Erna is surprised, realizing her oversight. She expresses gratitude to him. On the other hand, Gladys visibly reacts to their conversation, her eyes betraying her shock. Amidst the unfolding situation, Erna feels a sense of dizziness and uncertainty. Bjorn, sporting a smile, then asks her if she'd grant him the privilege of admiring the paintings together. The scene leaves everyone astonished, including Erna herself, who appears as bewildered as a startled fawn. Meanwhile, Bjorn exudes confidence, his smile like a wolf with an evil plan. Bjorn gently takes Erna's hands and encourages her to proceed. Their friends, having witnessed Bjorn's initial reluctance to engage in the bet, are surprised by this bold move. It seems he has had a change of heart. Meanwhile, in another setting, the king and queen engage in conversation. The king expresses curiosity about the stunning lady with Bjorn. Louise, Bjorn's sister, informs the king that the lady is Erna Hardy, Viscount Hardy's daughter, the same woman who had attracted attention at the royal ball, while accompanied by Bjorn. Leonid, Bjorn's younger brother, is taken aback, unable to comprehend his brother's intentions. Louise is also surprised to hear about Erna's handkerchief left on the bench, interpreting it as an age-old tactic to pique a man's interest. They are puzzled as to why Bjorn would fall for such an obvious and base scheme. The queen advises her daughter to cease fretting, fearing that their conversation might be overheard. Louise felt upset because nobody in her family would listen to her when she tried to speak. The queen told the king they should investigate the woman who had caught Bjorn's attention. Erna and Bjorn were spending time together when Erna suggested that Bjorn leave first. This confused Bjorn, who wanted to explore the paintings together. Erna explained that she felt she had already done her part and showed her annoyance with Bjorn. Bjorn saw some women watching them and encouraged Erna to stay where they were. This made Erna even more frustrated, and she asked him what he was doing. But Bjorn ignored her objections, gently holding her shoulder and telling her to stay still. He reminded her that if she chose to play a part, she needed to commit to it. Onlookers whispered about them, and Erna felt her annoyance growing. Erna pouted in a charming way, catching the prince's attention. He asked if she was mad, and she replied that it wasn't exactly anger. The prince persisted, suggesting she seemed upset with him. Erna reassured him that wasn't the case. She admitted she had caused trouble for him at the royal ball, and saw this moment as a way to make up for it. Bjorn's smile faded, and he asked about her mistake and the notion of making amends. Erna said she wasn't mad about the trouble he caused. She was okay with it because he helped her before. Erna stayed quiet, but was still a bit upset. Bjorn asked if they were even now. Bjorn mentioned Erna's careful thinking and suggested they call it a fair deal. Then he took his hand off Erna's shoulder, which made her feel better. But suddenly, he gently touched her hand. This surprised Erna, and she asked what he was doing. Prince Bjorn said he looked forward to seeing her again. He smiled at Erna, making her blush. People nearby couldn't believe what was happening. The prince's actions caused whispers among them. Two of his friends were frustrated, asking why he acted uninterested at first, but then made a move. They wanted to know what he said to Erna and if he planned to meet her again. Prince Bjorn got annoyed with his friends talking and told them to mind their own business. One of his friends couldn't believe Bjorn was taking the bet seriously, saying it showed how greedy rich people can be. The other friend questioned how he could flirt with another woman right in front of his ex-wife just for some money. They asked Bjorn about his plans and worried about how his actions might affect Erna Hardy. Bjorn, looking at his friends with contempt, called them pathetic and reminded them that the bet was their idea because they said they cared about Erna Hardy. This made them uneasy about the situation. Suddenly, a nobleman who had been thinking about going to the art show arrived with his student Pavel Lor, the winner of this year's art contest. He proudly introduced Pavel as the most talented artist at the academy, hoping to show him to the prince. What they didn't know was that Pavel is Erna's childhood friend. Pavel greeted the prince respectfully. However, Bjorn noticed Pavel seemed more like a soldier than an artist in his manner. Prince Bjorn returned the greetings and said he looked forward to seeing Pavel's future work. Pavel thanked the prince graciously. While they chatted, the prince remembered Pavel's name in connection with Erna and their meeting in the garden. Meanwhile, Erna still held her hand, remembering the tingling feeling from the prince's kiss on her hand. Suddenly, Pavel came across his childhood friend Erna, and he was completely shocked to see her again after so many years apart. Pavel called out to her, and his voice startled Erna. She was thrilled to see him again after so long. They were both amazed they had found each other, and Erna was surprised by how much Pavel had grown into a handsome and respectable man. Pavel greeted Erna warmly, expressing his delight at their long-awaited reunion. Erna, with a glowing smile, acknowledged that it had been quite some time since they last met. Pavel returned her smile warmly, expressing his joy at this unexpected encounter. However, Pavel's teacher called for him, signaling his departure. As he left, people nearby whispered about meeting again later, filling Erna's heart with happiness. Erna thought back to Pavel's familiar smile, glad to see he hadn't changed over the years, and she looked forward to their next meeting eagerly. Because of her encounter with him, she was able to push aside the troubling events of the day. Later, Erna came back home and began writing letters to her suitors, blushing as she remembered the prince's kiss on her hand. Lisa, holding a lovely bouquet, joked if they were trying to fill the room with every flower from Schuber. She questioned whether the young men knew how to read and why they persisted even after being turned down. Lisa suggested Erna didn't need to reply to all of them, but Erna insisted on writing back to each one, remembering her grandmother's advice about a lady's grace and politeness, even in rejection, which meant a lot to her. Erna asked about any other letters, and Lisa, realizing she meant Pavel's letter, sadly informed her that was all she had. Seeing Erna's eagerness for that letter, Lisa teased her gently, making Erna blush and hurriedly clarify it wasn't as important as it seemed. That night, Erna found herself thinking about Pavel. 3 days had passed since they met again, and she hadn't heard from him. She wondered if he was just busy, convincing herself that nothing bad could have happened to him. She held on to the hope that he would reach out to her soon. Erna couldn't shake off the memory of seeing Pavel and the feeling of Prince Bjorn's kiss on her hand. The sensation of that kiss kept her awake, and she blushed as she lay in bed. Meanwhile, at night, Bjorn enjoyed a drink with his friend. The prince grinned, teasing his friend about his upcoming marriage. His slightly intoxicated friend replied dismissively, telling Bjorn to take his trophy and go. With a smirk, Bjorn left, continuing to joke with his friends about the challenges of dealing with their new wives. The atmosphere in the bar was lively, with everyone getting drunk. People admired Bjorn's ability to drink, seeing him as a real party animal. They couldn't remember the last time they saw him lose at a bachelor party. They wondered if he enjoyed getting everyone completely drunk during these parties. One of his friends mentioned that Bjorn had a reputation for hating to lose a bet. They assumed he must have numerous such trophies at home, although they weren't quite sure where they all were. In fact, they suspected he even won on his own bachelor night. Later that evening, Erna strolled through the quiet streets of Schuber. The night was serene, with few people around, and she found comfort in the peaceful atmosphere. She realized she had only ventured out because of a nightmare earlier. Thoughts of Pavel had been occupying her mind since their reunion. Despite her reservations, there were moments when Erna deeply wished to converse with Pavel. These thoughts lingered in her mind. Suddenly, Erna noticed a drunken Prince Bjorn lying beside the famous fountain. His state surprised her, and she initially couldn't recognize the collapsed figure. Approaching Bjorn, she asked about his well-being, offering to call for help if needed. Bjorn stirred at the sound of her voice and saw Erna's face. It was then that she recognized him as Prince Bjorn. Groaning from the drinks, Bjorn reached out and grabbed Erna, causing her to step back in surprise. He seemed out of sorts. He was taken aback to see Erna Hardy again and assumed she had been following him, finding her persistence surprising. Bjorn thought about Erna's actions, recalling how composed she had seemed earlier when discussing fair deals. He wondered why she was following him again today. The prince, with slightly slurred speech from alcohol, asked Erna why she was out so late at night. In response, Erna noticed the strong smell of alcohol on him. Annoyed and alarmed, she yelled at him to let her go and threatened to scream if he didn't. However, Bjorn pulled her closer and repeated his question, demanding to know her reason for being out at night. Erna felt pain in her hand from Bjorn's tight grip, but asserted that it was a public square and she had the right to be there. The prince chuckled at her response, leaving Erna trembling with anger and shocked at his absurd behavior. She offered to get help if he needed it, but Bjorn believed she was pretending to be innocent. He was convinced that women like her hid malicious intentions behind their innocent looks, and he suspected this might be what she was waiting for. With audacity, Prince Bjorn asked Erna if she was willing to be sold off by him, implying that rumors were already spreading. This enraged Erna even more, and she shook with anger at his words. Erna found the prince's behavior too forward for a late-night encounter, feeling confused about his intentions. She asserted her strength to Bjorn, but found the conversation offensive and unpleasant, demanding that he release her. The prince suggested negotiating a deal and asked about her value, further provoking Erna, who questioned if he knew when to stop. In response, he asked if he seemed like someone who would stop. Erna couldn't believe how the man who was once the crown prince had deteriorated. Then, she noticed Bjorn wobbling, and suddenly, he collapsed with a loud thud, both of them ending up on the ground. Erna screamed for help as Bjorn had passed out from drunkenness. Nearby people approached, and Erna saw Bjorn's trophy on the ground. She picked it up and gently nudged the prince with it to check if he would respond. One bystander who came to help witnessed Erna using the trophy on the prince, leaving them both shocked by the situation. The next day, Lisa told Erna about a letter from Pavel, which surprised her because she wasn't expecting it so soon. Excitedly, she opened it and found out Pavel wanted to meet at the Archduke's Bridge. Erna was thrilled. She'd finally see her childhood friend Pavel again. She imagined sharing everything that had happened during their time apart, the thoughts and feelings she couldn't talk about with anyone else. But Erna couldn't forget her unsettling encounter with the rude prince. The night he aggressively grabbed her still bothered her, making her feel uneasy. She also remembered Lisa's warning about the prince, comparing him to a poisonous mushroom. At first, Erna didn't understand, but now she got it. The prince's behavior was indeed toxic and harmful. Meanwhile, at Prince Bjorn's mansion, the butler grew worried about the prince's injury, suggesting they call a doctor. He noticed the wound was worse than they thought and asked how it happened. Prince Bjorn assured the butler he was fine, playing down how bad the beating was. The butler was shocked that anyone would dare hurt the prince and wanted to know who did it. With a smirk, the prince hinted that it was someone he saw as a savage, and he couldn't help but think of Erna. He found the whole situation audacious. Later, Prince Bjorn went to his office to deal with paperwork. That's when he got an interesting letter and invitation from House Harver, which belonged to his great-aunt. He was surprised to hear from her and figured it was that time of year when she showed off her connections. The prince decided against declining the invitation and instead told the maid to let House Harver know he'd be coming to the event. The head maid was visibly shocked by this, as it was unusual for the prince to accept invitations. She reminded him that his aunt, Marchioness Harver, liked to invite everyone, even Gladys. The prince knew his great-aunt loved throwing lavish parties and inviting all her contacts to see the spectacle. He realized she wouldn't miss the chance to invite someone who was the talk of the town. Also, with the new arrival, Erna Hardy, causing a stir with the gossip mill, the prince was sure Erna would get an invitation too. The head maid was surprised the prince still wanted to go, especially knowing that both Gladys and Erna would be there. His decision caught her off guard. In response, the prince explained that he felt like everyone was expecting some entertainment, so he should at least do one good thing. He acknowledged that his dear great-aunt didn't have much time left due to her chronic illness, and he wanted to bring her joy for as long as she was still around. He assured the head maid that he wouldn't stress his aunt out too much. The head maid was furious at the prince's seemingly insensitive remark about his aunt's illness. In the background, Bjorn also thought attending the event would be a good chance to catch the trophy thief, whom he suspected was Erna. He smiled as he pondered what kind of retribution he might demand from the little thief to feel satisfied. Meanwhile, at sunset, Pavel waited for Erna. He couldn't believe it was really her he saw. He knew she was a big topic in high society, along with the former crown prince and princess. According to the articles, she was depicted as a materialistic woman who cared only about finding a wealthy husband. Pavel was puzzled by what had happened since he left and never expected to find her in Lechen. Pavel was struck by the profound transformation of a countryside girl into a refined lady within a year. His reverie was interrupted by Erna's distant call, her beauty unchanged, accompanied by her maid. Despite the passage of time, Pavel couldn't help but reminisce about the Erna he once knew, leading him to chuckle nostalgically. Erna inquired if Pavel preferred to be addressed as Mr. Torgelor once more, but he declined, insisting on being just Pavel, her old friend for the day. Erna responded with a radiant smile, prompting a mirrored expression from Pavel. As they clasped hands, remembering their past friendship, Lisa saw this as a poignant moment, feeling as though she were witnessing a scene from a television drama. Eventually, with a solemn demeanor, Erna sought solace in confiding her father's intentions to marry her off for financial gain to Pavel. Expressing her reluctance towards marriage, Erna felt her father's duty overshadowed her desires. This revelation left Pavel visibly concerned, as Viscount Hardy's intentions appeared transparent. Pavel grasped the disheartening truth that Walter, Erna's father, prioritized financial gain over parental responsibilities, intending to auction off his daughter. Despite his anger, Pavel realized his limited ability to intervene. Meanwhile, Bjorn sat down to write a letter to his great-aunt, feeling content with the morning's update from Freyr Bank. He anticipated making a nice profit if things continued going well. The only thing left was getting ready for his great-aunt's upcoming ball. However, as he glanced out the window, he spotted Pavel and Erna casually walking together. He couldn't help but notice how happy Erna seemed with Pavel by her side. Bjorn was surprised, realizing that the red-haired man was definitely Pavel Lore. A mischievous grin crossed Prince Bjorn's face as he entertained some less than noble thoughts. He guessed that while Erna was mingling in high society, looking for a suitable husband, she was secretly enjoying the company of a young artist. To him, it explained why some people were calling her the next Gladys Hartford. He found the whole situation ridiculous. After Pavel offers to walk Erna home, she assures him that Lisa will be accompanying her. She thanks Pavel for the enjoyable day and for offering to help her find a place to sell her artificial flowers. Pavel brushes off any concern and mentions that he also had a good time. He wishes Erna a safe journey home and tells her to reach out if she ever needs help. They part ways and head home. In a flashback, Pavel's father advises him to stop visiting Baron Varden's place, marking a turning point in their lives. They're no longer children, and Pavel agrees with his father. Rumors have started spreading about him, the son of a lumberyard owner, and the Baron's granddaughter from a fallen noble family. For appearance's sake, they need to distance themselves from each other. He must view her only as a sister. There can never be anything more between them. That's why it ends here. He sets a boundary, and he must stick to it. Later that night, Prince Bjorn visited his great-aunt, who warmly welcomed him and remarked on how long it had been since their last meeting. She mentioned that Gladys was at the gathering, and Bjorn guessed that his younger siblings hadn't made it. As they chatted, he noticed Erna nearby. His aunt encouraged him to greet Gladys and told him she had forgiven him. She thought they should reconcile and lead more respectable lives, warning that his current lifestyle would affect his health as he aged. Ignoring his aunt's advice, the prince walked up to Erna and greeted her with a playful nickname, Gold Thief, which surprised her as he approached. Perplexed by the nickname, Erna asked what it meant, feeling uneasy around the prince. Bjorn then asked if they could talk privately. However, Erna refused, still holding on to resentment for his actions that night. Bjorn, not one to shy away, accused Erna of being arrogant, especially since she had taken something from him. He demanded to know what she had done with his trophy. Erna, feeling perplexed and annoyed, insisted she had no idea what he was talking about and asked him to leave her alone since people were starting to stare. But the prince wouldn't let it go, insisting he'd leave her alone once she returned the trophy she took from him. Erna remained puzzled, unable to understand why he was calling her a thief and treating her this way. She asked him to explain his behavior. Bjorn stuck to his accusation, claiming Erna had stolen something from him in his eyes. Erna was shocked by his words, finding it hard to believe he would insult her like that. Observing Erna's apparent selective memory, Bjorn pointed out that she conveniently forgot certain things that didn't suit her. Erna's annoyance escalated as she questioned what Bjorn was trying to accomplish. She believed the awful experience she had endured with him the other night should have been enough, yet here he was, being rude to her once again. She couldn't understand his behavior and suggested he might have been too drunk to remember what had happened. Regardless, she found his actions and words completely unacceptable. Bjorn reassured Erna that he did remember the events of that night, leaving her shocked and speechless. The memories of that incident, when the prince had fallen onto her, rushed back to her mind. Prince Bjorn openly admitted that he remembered everything that had happened at the Tara Square fountain. Erna felt embarrassed and was at a loss for words. The prince acknowledged that he had crossed a line and offered an apology, taking some responsibility for the incident. He then made a gracious gesture and suggested that it was now Erna's turn to apologize. Erna's anger surged as she demanded to know what she was being asked to apologize for. Prince Bjorn suggested she apologize for attacking him with his own trophy and then stealing it before fleeing. Erna's memory was triggered, and she finally recalled the incident. She remembered seeing the golden rod on the ground, and now it all came back to her. Bjorn noticed Erna's silence, realizing she had recollected the incident. He asked what she had done with his trophy, and after a moment of thought, Erna remembered feeling uncomfortable with the trophy having touched the prince. She explained that while walking down the street, she had tossed it away. The prince was surprised to hear she had thrown the trophy away and questioned why she had done so. Erna explained that she had thrown the trophy onto the road while walking home, but then they both heard music in the distance. Prince Bjorn noticed it and realized what was happening. Overwhelmed with tears, Erna didn't know what to do. However, Bjorn, still holding her hand, suggested they join the dance for now since the music and guests were already dancing. This surprised Erna, but she eventually understood his suggestion as the music and the guests set the mood for dancing. Then, Erna admitted to Prince Bjorn that she couldn't dance. He responded that their conversation was going to be a long one, and hiding behind the stone column would only attract more attention from everyone present. With no other choice, Erna took Prince Bjorn's hand, and they stepped onto the dance floor. Everyone at the ball, including Lady Hardy, was staring at them. Lady Hardy looked despondent and trembled with sadness on her face, but Prince Bjorn simply smiled at her. To him, seeing Gladys's expression at that moment, he feels rather grateful to Erna. Erna asks if the trophy was really made of gold, and he confirms that it was. She's shocked that she didn't realize it was real gold that night. With that, she promises to repay him for it. She explains that she can't give him the money right away, but if he gives her some time, she'll do whatever it takes. The prince grins and agrees, satisfied with how things are unfolding. It feels like he's holding a winning hand in a card game with a straight flush. Prince Bjorn realizes that Erna isn't as naive as he initially thought. She seems to be a lady who understands the basics of a fair trade, making their little game much easier to navigate. The prince suggests that her payment could be repaid by dancing with him at the ball. They take to the dance floor, and as they move together, they look like a married couple. Their dancing not only makes everyone in the room a little jealous, but also brightens up the atmosphere of the ball. As they danced gracefully, Erna remained focused on her steps, recalling the lessons her grandmother had taught her about becoming a proper lady. Meanwhile, Bjorn observed Erna closely. Her innocent demeanor made him wonder if all of this was just an act. He considered that if it was a calculated plan, then she must be the most skilled actress in all of Lechen. In the distance, Gladys watched the scene, and she, too, had once been even more naive, at least on the surface. Bjorn couldn't help but enjoy the sight of Gladys as he grinned. He felt a sense of gratitude toward Erna for helping him create a perfect scene in front of the largest possible audience. With a serious expression in her eyes, Erna and the prince couldn't help but enjoy the dance. As the dance came to an end, everyone below them erupted in applause, impressed by the marvelous performance. The prince praised Erna for the wonderful dance and told her that she could take her time repaying him for the trophy, whispering to her discreetly. A beautiful smile graced Erna's face as she thanked the prince, causing a slight flutter in his heart. And with that, I conclude part 4 of this wonderful story. What will happen next? Now that Bjorn and Erna are getting closer, will there come a time when they will be dating? How about Pavel? Since Erna and Pavel are childhood friends, are they going to end up together? Tune in next time for part 5 of this series. Thank you for watching. After the ball, Bjorn found himself outside with a couple of pals. They were curious if Bjorn and Erna were an item, but it wasn't crystal clear. It seemed like Bjorn might be bending some rules. Bjorn stayed quiet once more, feeling a bit awkward. One friend advised him to chill out, while the other mentioned getting a letter from Miss Erna. They checked it out, and although it seemed like a rejection, they noticed Erna was really polite, thanking them for the letters and flowers. One friend joked about the rejection, but Bjorn was lost in thought about Erna. He figured it made sense for her to be straightforward, even when it's tough. Then, one of them spotted Lady Erna chatting with another guy, the second son of the Heinz family. They couldn't really butt in, but they watched with concern from a distance. Bjorn told his friends they could go bet on it if they were bothered, but to leave him be. He wanted Erna to make her own decisions. Out of the blue, Gladys showed up, wanting to talk. His friends bolted, and Bjorn reluctantly agreed to hear her out. She asked if he planned to keep using Erna like that. At first, he was puzzled about whose lady she meant, but then he got it she was talking about Erna. He questioned Gladys, wondering how she could be so sure he didn't genuinely care for Erna. To him, Erna, the country pumpkin, was not only more beautiful, but also kinder and more innocent than Gladys. But Gladys remained unconvinced, warning him not to harm an innocent person. She insisted they sort out their affairs together. This irked the prince. He thought he had made it clear that their arrangement was over and done with. Seeing Gladys tremble with sadness, he found himself at a loss for words as she proposed yet another deal, leaving him curious about its terms. He pressed her for details. Gladys then dropped a bombshell. She could help him regain the crown he lost because of her. The prince was taken aback, asking if she truly wanted to aid him in reclaiming his throne. She explained her plan. If they appeared reunited and happy in public, people would rally behind him once more, and he could resume his position as crown prince. She acknowledged his difficulty in forgiving her, but pleaded for another chance to make things right. Initially, the prince saw where she was going with this, but his smile quickly faded into fury as he pulled away from her. He rebuked her proposal, stating it was impossible because he didn't lose the crown because of her. If he had wanted to hold on to the crown, he had numerous methods at his disposal, including resorting to violence. Prince Bjorn stunned Gladys even more by confessing that he willingly gave up the crown because he didn't covet it enough, and he had alternative, even forceful, methods to retain it if he desired. Turning to Princess Gladys, he challenged her about what she had to offer. He questioned how Leonid, who had the crown thrust upon him, would react to her suggestion that he should simply relinquish it because the Princess of Lars wanted it. With tears in her eyes, Gladys tried to clarify her intentions, but the prince stormed off, advising her to seek her aspirations of returning as the beloved crown princess elsewhere. As Bjorn exited the room, fatigue setting in, he decided it was time to leave. Suddenly, he heard a cry and recognized it as Erna's voice. Earlier, Erna had found herself in a predicament with the second son of the Heinz family. He had grabbed her wrist forcefully, accusing her of arrogance and questioning her alleged promises with the Archduke. Upset, Erna demanded he release her, questioning why he was treating her this way. The man appeared visibly irritated, accusing Erna of arrogance simply because the rich son had shown her some attention. He belittled her for wasting her time chasing after the prince. Then, he suggested Erna could make a better impression on him, hinting that if she behaved properly, he might consider buying her instead of the old man. Erna, noticing the strong smell of alcohol on him, asked what he meant. In response, he insinuated that Erna's father didn't care who he sold her to, as long as the price was right. This implied that if he offered even a slightly higher price than the old man, Erna would be sold to him instead. The despicable man then groped Erna and attempted to kiss her, causing her to scream in terror. Despite Erna's efforts to resist, it seemed futile. She was in tears, frightened, and struggling against the assailant. Erna pushed the man away desperately and fled, her mind racing with panic about where to go and how to escape. As she ran, she struggled to find a safe path. Despite her efforts, the man caught up to her, insisting there was no point in running. Feeling trapped, Erna frantically searched for a way out. She glanced at a nearby window, considering if she could manage to jump through it. With his persistence growing, the man continued to pressure Erna to comply. Cornered and trembling with fear, Erna finally screamed for help. The sound of her screams reached Prince Bjorn, initially brushing it off as a misunderstanding. However, upon hearing a second scream, he decided he had heard enough. Assuming someone had drunk too much expensive wine and was now bothering a maid, he found the situation irritating, especially given his already aggravated mood. Amidst the chaos, Erna, driven by desperation and self-preservation, used a candelabrum to strike the man. The candelabrum became stained with blood, underscoring the violence of the confrontation. This turn of events surprised Prince Bjorn, prompting him to inquire about the situation. Trembling with fear and tears streaming down her face, Erna explained that she believed she had killed the man. She stressed that it was accidental, as she had struck him in self-defense, causing him to fall and hit his head, resulting in a significant amount of blood. Upon hearing this, Prince Bjorn realized the severity of the situation with the second son of House Heinz. Even individuals with questionable reputations typically knew better than to mistreat a noble family's daughter in such a manner. Prince Bjorn reassured Erna, urging her not to worry and explaining that the man had simply fainted. He assured her that individuals like him didn't easily succumb, and the man would likely regain consciousness soon. Although still trembling and likely traumatized by the incident, Erna felt a sense of relief upon hearing the prince's words. To comfort her, Prince Bjorn took off his coat and draped it around Erna's shoulders, reassuring her that everything would be all right. He then asked if she could manage to walk on her own. Still trembling, Erna nodded in response. Bjorn gently took the candelabrum from her hands and encouraged her to leave. Tears welled up in Erna's eyes as she fretted about Prince Bjorn. He assured her that once she exited the room, she should follow the passage on the far left until she reached some stairs. Those stairs would lead her to the garden behind the house, and from there she should continue straight along the path to find where all the carriages were waiting. He promised to handle the rest. With genuine concern, the prince smiled at her and added that she shouldn't worry because he always repaid his debts. Then he asked her if she liked boating, to which Erna confessed she wasn't sure. In response, the prince declared that she would have to like it because that would be their next date. He urged Erna to hurry and escape, assuring her not to worry about him. Despite her persistent concern for the prince, she eventually managed to flee the room. Once Erna was out of sight, Bjorn grabbed a nearby flower vase and poured its contents onto the unconscious man to revive him. The man groggily awakened, surprised to be met with a disarming smile from Bjorn. The prince politely greeted him and offered an apology, expressing relief that the man hadn't died. However, the man's response was anything but gracious. He erupted in anger, accusing Bjorn of insanity. This only fueled Bjorn's fury further, and without hesitation, he struck the man with the candelabrum, forcefully defending himself against the aggressor. As he administered a beating to the man, Prince Bjorn taunted him with a mixture of menace and wit. Roughing him up, Bjorn made a point. He questioned if people would believe they had engaged in a fight, suggesting that it might be more respectable for the man to be known as someone who had clashed with the troublesome prince, rather than someone who had been defeated by a woman. Bjorn explained that their social circle had keen eyes, and it would be better to entertain the narrative of their altercation instead. As the confrontation unfolded, the man ended up bloodied and severely beaten, a testament to Bjorn's skill and fearlessness. This showcased just how tough our guy truly is. Afterward, Bjorn strode into the ballroom, still gripping the bloodied candelabrum in his hand. The news of this surprise spread rapidly, becoming the hot topic among the attendees. Even Gladys couldn't help but take notice. Suddenly, the Heinz gentleman regained consciousness, his face bruised and battered, shocking onlookers. This unexpected turn of events even surprised Bjorn's great aunt. The next day, at Erna's home, Lisa delivered a surprising revelation. The legendary golden trophy actually existed. Erna's face reflected her shock as she grappled with this unexpected information. Lisa went on to explain that it was a tradition in a social club for young men about to be married to prepare cold trophies resembling deer antlers for their bachelor parties. Erna had a moment of realization that the prince had indeed been truthful, leaving her unsure about her next steps. This revelation was startling, especially given the recent tense encounters between them. Intrigued by the gentleman's game, Lisa probed Erna for more information. In response, Erna fabricated a tale, claiming she had heard about it at a party and was merely curious. She couldn't shake the memory of the recent trouble caused by the royal poisonous mushroom. He had been involved in excessive drinking and a brawl, tarnishing his reputation as the prodigal son. Erna found herself in a position where she felt compelled to defend Bjorn, suggesting that perhaps the rumors weren't entirely accurate. She wished she could clarify that he hadn't been intoxicated that night, but the words escaped her. Lisa was surprised by Erna's defense of the prince. Erna tried to clarify that her intention wasn't to overtly support him, but rather to caution against rushing to judgments without all the facts. She emphasized the importance of not hastily jumping to conclusions. During their conversation, Lisa caught on to Erna's defense of the prince. Erna tried to justify herself, emphasizing that she was merely cautioning against making snap judgments. However, Lisa warned Erna not to be swayed by the prince's appearance, referring to him as the poisonous mushroom. Erna sighed deeply as she contemplated her situation. She felt deeply indebted to the prince for all he had done for her. Despite her thorough search of the area, using the excuse of a leisurely stroll to retrace her steps from the fountain to the house that night, she had been unable to locate the missing trophy. Adding to her distress, she had unfairly blamed her error on the prince and fled like a coward, an act she found deeply shameful. Seeking solace and a solution, she retreated to her closet. As she looked at the meager amount of money she possessed, she realized it was nowhere near enough to afford even a fraction of a deer antler trophy. All she had was a small sum and a few coins, along with her cherished flower, which she kept hidden. As Erna gazed at the flower, a plan began to take shape in her mind. Later, she made her way to the bridge where she was to meet Pavel, hoping her plan would somehow make amends for her predicament. Meanwhile, Prince Bjorn rode along in his carriage, feeling content with how the summer was unfolding. Freyerbank was thriving, his horse race winnings were satisfactory, and Lady Viscount Hardy's presence in society was waning, which pleased him. Bjorn also pondered over Erna Hardy and the rumors swirling around them. He didn't pay much mind to the gossip and acknowledged that things had become considerably easier for him because of her. Unbeknownst to him, Erna was about to assist him in winning a significant bet. Suddenly, he was surprised to see Erna waiting for him, carrying a sizable box. Inviting Erna into his carriage, Bjorn observed as she prepared a gift for him. He asked if she had anything to say, noticing her slight discomfort in her elegant attire. Bjorn encouraged Erna to speak up, and she mentioned her intention to return the evening coat he had lent her. Bjorn was taken aback and suggested she could have easily had her servant return it, but Erna insisted on doing it herself, expressing her gratitude and apologizing for any inconvenience. Surprised by her apology, Bjorn questioned its reason. Erna then confessed her involvement in the incident that resulted in Lord Heinz's injuries. Bjorn admitted that there was some truth to the rumor, as he had indeed struck Lord Heinz. This revelation shocked Erna, prompting her to inquire why Bjorn had taken such action. Bjorn clarified that he did it because he believed Lord Heinz deserved it for instigating the attack on Erna. He stressed that the pain he inflicted upon Lord Heinz far outweighed what he had received. Erna couldn't help but feel concerned and worried about Bjorn's well-being. However, she couldn't shake the memory that the person who had assaulted her the previous night was now showing concern for her. Bjorn reassured Erna that he was perfectly fine, dismissing her need to apologize or thank him. He then asked if she had something on her mind, prompting her to reveal a bouquet of her favorite lilies of the valley. This took Bjorn by surprise, and he questioned if she planned to sell flowers. Erna confirmed her intention, but not to him. She explained that she aimed to use the earnings to repay the debt for the golden trophy, as she had promised. This left Bjorn speechless, unable to grasp her plan to sell flowers to repay for something made of gold. Erna remained firm in her decision. Continuing their conversation, Prince Bjorn asked Erna if she was determined to reimburse him before his eventual demise. Once more, Erna affirmed her commitment, acknowledging it might take some time. With a hint of pride, she shared that her artificial flowers fetched a surprisingly high price. Though it might have seemed like boasting, it underscored her skill in crafting these blooms. Bjorn couldn't help but notice her hat adorned with a profusion of flowers, a clear testament to her fondness for them. Bjorn reassured Erna, granting her the freedom to do as she pleased with the flowers. Erna was genuinely grateful for his understanding and radiated with delight. She insisted that he keep one of the lilies of the valley, her most cherished flower, as a symbol of their agreement. Bjorn found Erna's behavior peculiar yet intriguing. She was proving to be a unique and captivating individual, and the prince couldn't help but ponder on the peculiarities of Lady Erna. Prince Leonid, Bjorn's younger brother, was waiting for him and asked why he was late. In response, Bjorn explained that something unexpected had arisen, describing it as a personal matter. Leonid noticed Bjorn holding a lily of the valley, a flower beloved by Gladys. He inquired about the flower and questioned if Bjorn had met up with Gladys by chance. Suddenly, Bjorn tossed the flower that Erna had made onto the ashtray. Despite his little brother's shock at the sudden action, Bjorn remained indifferent. He instructed Leonid to hurry along, offering to take a handicap since he was running late. Reflecting on his mother's words, where she had asked him to look after Leonid well, Bjorn felt a pang of responsibility. However, Leonid couldn't shake off a sense of unease about his older brother, feeling that he was behaving somewhat suspiciously, although he couldn't pinpoint any glaring issues. The two brothers engaged in a brotherly conversation, during which Leonid expressed his belief that it wasn't something a novice should be saying to the master. Bjorn replied, somewhat flippantly, that he supposed pool was his specialty. In Leonid's mind, he sensed that their mother's words had likely stemmed from concern rather than an accurate assessment of Bjorn's skill. Meanwhile, Erna sat at the cafe, sipping her tea, her thoughts dwelling on her relief that she could sell her faux flowers thanks to her childhood friend Pavel. Her expression betrayed a mix of sadness and relief. While she was glad that Prince Bjorn had accepted her flower, envisioning it as a fitting boutonniere for him, she couldn't shake the memory of him discarding it onto the ashtray. At that moment, Erna's mind turned to Lisa, feeling as if her presence somehow prevented her from meeting Bjorn. Erna reflects on the complexity of Bjorn's character, acknowledging him as both flawed and kind. She recalls moments when he saved her, and a smile involuntarily graces her lips as she reminisces about his acts of kindness and chivalry. Suddenly, Lisa returns from collecting Erna's sales and notices her smiling to herself, catching Erna off guard. Lisa is ecstatic, having earned more than last week. She praises Erna's impressive talent in making faux flowers, expressing admiration for her skills. Gratefully, Erna thanks Lisa, acknowledging that she couldn't have achieved it without her help. Lisa, in turn, modestly acknowledges her contribution, but insists that her skills pale in comparison to Erna's, even though she learned from her. She expresses gratitude for being paid for her assistance. Erna compliments Lisa, praising her efforts, and Lisa jokingly wonders if Erna is her guardian angel, encouraging her to make even more flowers next week. Erna is delighted by Lisa's motivation. Later, as they head home, Erna's father, Walter, awaits her, informing her that the Viscount is urgently seeking her. Puzzled, Erna wonders about the reason for his summons. Meanwhile, at Bjorn's palace, the Queen pays a sudden visit. Bjorn, curious about her unexpected appearance, speculates that it's not merely to congratulate him on his recent winnings. The Queen dismisses the maid's offer of assistance, indicating that her visit is brief. With a disappointed expression, she addresses Bjorn by his full name, a clear indication that serious matters are at hand. The Queen presents a newspaper with a headline that reads, "Archduke tricked by a temptress in Marchioness Harver's party." She asks Bjorn to explain the incidents, leaving him speechless as he reads the article. According to an anonymous whistleblower who attended the party, that night Bjorn was allegedly engaged in a secret rendezvous with a beautiful noble lady, which led to a fight when a passing witness intervened. Bjorn suspects Heinz, the man who assaulted Erna, of being behind the article. Irritated, Bjorn reflects on Heinz, wishing he had punched him in the mouth instead of his face that night. However, the primary issue isn't Bjorn's altercation, but rather the rumors surrounding the lady involved. She has become the subject of scandalous rumors, with some suggesting that she is the obstacle preventing the reunion of Princess Gladys and Bjorn. The question arises, will the poisonous mushroom of the royal family fall prey to the schemes of a seductress aiming to become the next Archduchess? Many in Lechen hope that Bjorn will apologize to Gladys and remarry her, restoring his status as an exemplary member of the royal family. The people of Lechen pray that their wishes will be heard beyond the walls of Schuber Castle. That concludes this part of the story. What happens next? Can Erna repay her debts to Bjorn? What will happen to that Heinz bastard after the incident? He even lied about the article. And could Bjorn's feelings for Erna evolve in the future like husband and wife, or like a lover or something? Stay tuned for more in the next part of this series, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this type of story, I have different videos that you can watch in the description, and I recommend The Horny Tyrant. It's a good story. Anyway, thank you for watching.